Hello everyone, I am Ellie Bennett and I am going to be presenting, as Tara very nicely introduced, my presentation. Unfortunately, I couldn't think of a much snappier title, so it is titled Using Networks to Investigate Semantics of Masculinities During the Neo-Assyrian Period. The goal of my current project is to see whether I can use methods such as those developed by the Semantic Domains team here at the University of Helsinki and in AMME to uncover information about masculinities during the Neo-Assyrian period. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, that was a period from the 10th to late 7th centuries BC in modern-day Iraq. Now, apologies to those who have seen me present on masculinities before, but I feel like I need to give a very quick overview of the theory that I am using in my research. And this is Connell's theory on masculinity, which can be referred to as the hegemonic masculinity theory. Now, the main point that I have taken away from this is that there were multiple different forms of masculinity or masculine gender that can be present in a single society. Connell suggests that these can be broadly grouped together in 4 different categories. The first of which is hegemonic masculinity. And this is the ideal form of masculinity seen in a society and is often seen as naturally the ideal. And it is institutionalized, but because a lot of these aspects can contradict each other, it is not likely to be achievable by the majority of men. In fact, most men tend to fit the complicit category of masculinities. And here, individuals are constantly trying to achieve the ideal masculinity, and thus they uphold the institutions that maintain the hegemonic model. But for some reason, there's some aspect of their identity which prevents them from embodying and performing hegemonic masculinity. The third category is marginalized masculinity, and this for me is where you can first see the concept of intersectionality bleed through to the work, although Connell never refers to it explicitly in her work. Here, there is a marginalized aspect of someone's identity which impacts how their masculinity is expressed and performed. But these individuals in this group still uphold institutions of hegemonic masculinity. The final category is subordinate masculinity, and broadly speaking, this can be summarized as how not to be a man. And typically, this is seen as men demonstrating feminine traits. An important point about this model is that women and non-binary individuals can fit anywhere along the spectrum as well as men. Now, an important point of this theory is fluidity. On a macro scale, masculinities can change depending on society, the geography, or the time period that an individual exists in. But on a micro scale, masculinities can change as well. I've taken this diagram from Bainan and slightly modified it to be a bit more readable and presentable. And I think it really nicely shows some of the many different aspects of identity which can change and influence how masculinity can be expressed. For example, ethnicity, religion, and age. A key question of my project is whether digital humanities methods such as those by the Semantic Domains team, can go beyond the current examination of hegemonic masculinity in Neo-Assyrian period or the masculinities of the Neo-Assyrian kings. So can these methods uncover changes of masculinity according to age, status, or ethnicity? And what can we see in terms of non-hegemonic masculinities? So now I'm going to be taking you through the method that I used. This very much is based and follows very closely the work and the method that has been done by the Semantic Domains project. So I see a few of the members are here today, so I'm really sorry if I butcher your work, or if you have any comments afterwards, please tell me. So all of this will be very familiar to you. I've provided a couple of the citations of some of their work on the slide. And as an important note, if anyone is interested in these slides, please let me know and I can send them to you, as there are plenty of links to various bits of information on these slides as well. The theoretical concept behind the Semantic Domains research is the Furthian concept summarized by the phrase, "You shall know a word by the company it keeps." And this means that context can help understand a word's meaning. So the goal of the method is, can we determine a word's meaning by the words it is most connected to? And I found this method can quickly determine the connections between words and can identify interesting lists which can be investigated further. My first step was I took data from the open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus. For those of you unfamiliar, this is a website that has a large amount of digitized cuneiform text from across Mesopotamian history, and it has a large amount of digital annotations that allow for computational analysis. The code I use for this is available through my GitHub page if you're interested. I then ran Alexei Sahala's PMISA program. So this used a measurement called pointwise mutual information to essentially measure the probability of two words occurring in a specific area of text, with 0 being that these two words never occur together, and the upper limit is infinity. So this means the higher the number, the stronger the connection two words have. And I have a link to this program on the slide as well. I hope Alexei doesn't mind that. Now, in order to use this program, you need a list of words that you're interested in. So I selected words that are tied to masculinities in the Neo-Assyrian period, and this was based on previous research. But I also included words that might show non-hegemonic masculinities. So the list looked something like man, woman, brave, coward, ally, enemy. This resulted in a list of 506 what I call target words, so the words that I'm interested in. But because this PMISA measurement returns the top 10 results per word, it meant in reality I had 5,060 results. So to make analysis easier and following the method of the semantic domains team, I put the results into the visualization software Gephi, and the code I used to get the results ready can be found on the link. Now this is what's called the global graph, or the entire visualization, and this was after running the Force Atlas 2 algorithm. And I colored the dots, which represent the words. And from this point on, I'm following social network analysis language, and they are called nodes, according to their what's called communities, or we can think of them as subgroups. And these are different colors. And I also size the nodes according to what's called the degree. So the degree is how many nodes a single node is connected to. So a larger node is connected to more words, and a smaller one is maybe connected to one. So as we can see, it's not a traditional social network analysis graph, as there aren't very nicely defined communities or large subgroups of words. And quite frankly, it looks a mess. So to aid analysis further, I turned to another piece of software that took the raw data and created a heat map. Now this heat map visually shows the density of the nodes on the graph. Again, on its own, it's not very helpful, and also rather unhelpfully, the software flipped the original graph upside down to cause some extra confusion for me. So I overlaid another image, which was just the colored nodes over the top. And we can see that there are loads of nodes which just aren't in densely populated areas at all. But with this, we can start to see some patterns, especially when we compare this to the original Gephi global graph. And I want to share some preliminary observations of some of the patterns I've seen. The first is that the area with the highest concentration of nodes covers several communities. There's no one community in this area. And these communities have words which cover three themes. The first is pious behavior. The second are words connected to the epithets of the Neo-Assyrian kings. And really interestingly, there's a group of words that are about age. We can also see that there are at least two large groups, the dark green and the orange, which appear to be words from the epithets of the Neo-Assyrian kings in the royal inscriptions. A final observation is that there are three groups, but rather confusingly two communities, of words which relate to warfare, and they are in different densities of the global graph. So these are only preliminary observations, and I need to go away and do some more thinking to see if this actually means anything or tells us anything about these sorts of words. But this global graph has allowed for some analysis of specific words, and I want to go into a case study to show you some of my results from this. So a topic that has confused me for some time is the suggestion that archery equipment was tied to male virility and fertility across ancient Near Eastern societies. This stemmed from an article by Hofner in 1966, who based this on Psalm 127, lines 4 to 5, which says, "Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. Now, this has puzzled me in terms of the Neo-Assyrian period, as I had only seen archery equipment in the palace reliefs in the context of warfare. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to use this method to assess whether the textual material relates archery equipment to virility in any way. So I looked at the following words on the global graph. Kashtu, the word for bow, Sasindu, the word for bowyer, Tilpanu, another word for bow, Molmulu, the word for arrow, Utsu, a word for arrow or arrowhead, Shiltahu, another word for arrow, and Ishpatu, the word for quiver. But I wanted to share some of my results for the words in purple, or Kashtu, Shiltahu, and Ishpatu. And this is largely just for the interests of time. So I started by looking at Kashtu, the word for bow. I isolated the word Kashtu with its immediate neighbors. In social network analysis, this is called a ego network. On the left is the ego network taken directly from the global graph. And as you can see, it's a little difficult to make out what the neighboring words were. So I reran the Force Atlas 2 algorithm on this network, and the one on the right is a lot more readable, at least to my eyes. So the next stage was to go to Corp, again, developed by the semantic domains team. I feel like I owe you all a huge round of drinks. Corp is a search engine which is capable of running complicated and powerful searches on ORAC material. The topmost circle shows the 4 variables I wanted to search for. The bottom left shows the interactive quick KWIC layout of the results, which also splits the data into the sub-projects that these results are found in ORAC. And the box on the right shows all of the data behind a specific word that is selected in the quick results box. Using this tool, I systematically worked my way around the ego network of Kashtu, starting with the words with the thickest edge line, so that's the strongest connecting line between the nodes. And this allowed me to find a context where we find these pairs of words and we can derive some sort of wider meaning behind the target word. Now, in the interest of time, I can't go through all of the results, but I wanted to share some of these, which I think were most reflective of my findings. Now, just a quick note, on these slides, I have the links for the Corp search results. As the PMISA script measures a set length before and after the target word, each connection has 2 Corp searches. One has the target word followed by the word of interest, and the other is the word of interest followed by the target word. So the first set of results I want to share with you are those of Kashtu, the word for bow, and Sabu, the word for people. Now, in one search, these words were used to designate the term archers. They were literally the people of the bow. And another search saw these in the context of items taken from Elam. So here we can say that Kashtu had a military context as it designated a troop type and was taken as part of the spoils of war. Everything seems very simple, clear-cut, military context only. But a more complicated is shown with the search for Kashtu, the word for bow, and Shaberu, the word for to break. And in the search results, we can see 2 clear themes. The first is that breaking a bow was some sort of a transgressive or non-normative action. In the literal litany, there is a man who is described as breaking his bow as one of several transgressive acts he participates in. And we can see that breaking a bow was used as a punishment by Tiglath-Pileser III against captured armed forces. And we see this motif in curse formulae as well. There is also a connection to the divine. The goddess Ishtar is described as breaking the bows of the enemies of King Esarhaddon. And Ishtar is also in curse formulae, where she is asked to break the bows of those who go against the oath. This link with the divine is even clearer when we start looking at the connection between Kashtu, again the word for bow, and Ishpatu, the word for quiver. In these, Ishtar and Marduk are described as hanging quivers on their side and holding a bow, both in contexts where these deities are getting ready to go into battle. So here we see an overlapping of the concepts of the divine and warfare. Now, if we go to the ego network of Ishpatu, the word for quiver, we can see that there were far fewer connections to explore. After previously looking at the connection between Ishpatu and Kashtu, I decided to look at the weak connection with Idu, the word for arm. as this was an object, as Ishpatu was an object in the Psalms quotation, I wanted to ensure I fully explored this word to try and understand all of the wider meanings. So there were not many results, which was to be expected from a weak connection, and the results that there were came from the same context as the search results for Kashtu and Ishpatu. And for me, this underscores the link that the word Ishpatu, the word for quiver, had to the divine, and in particular Ishtar and Marduk getting ready for battle. Finally, I'm turning to the other object described in the Psalms quotation, arrows, and here I focused on the Shiltahu arrow. On the left is the very spread out ego network taken directly from the global graph. It's so hard to read. And on the right is the same ego network after being run through Force Atlas 2 to make it more readable. So the first connection I searched was with the word shamru, the word for furious, or it can be used as an adjective, fierce. This connection seems to be describing an aspect of kingship, as Sennacherib is both charges into battle like a furious or fierce arrow, but also Esarhaddon receives one from Ishtar as one of the aspects of kingship. This also shows the link with the divine, but in the succession treaty of Esarhaddon, it is a new god, Ninurta, who is connected to this object, as this god is asked to fell transgressors with his fierce arrow. Whilst the connection between Shiltahu and Shalashi, the word for 3 times, was not very strong, it did demonstrate a really interesting context for Shiltahu, the word for arrow. In a ritual involving a lion and a hunt, the king had to spin an arrow 3 times. Here, the arrow is not just an object used by the gods rather abstractly, but it has a special and specific usage in at least one religious ritual. In the searches for the context of Shiltahu and Katu, we can see another deity in connection with arrows, and who gives an arrow as an aspect of kingship to Esarhaddon, and that god is Ashur. But interestingly, some of these results are from the Anzu myth and describe Ninurta attempting to kill Anzu by firing an arrow. And rather interestingly, half of the results are from a repeated passage describing Sennacherib's battle of Halule, where the arrow is specifically seen as a deadly weapon. Now, this aspect of the Shiltahu arrow as a deadly weapon is in starkest clarity in the searches for the context of the word Shiltahu, the word for arrow, and Napishtu, the word for throat, but it can also be used to describe the life. In these contexts, the arrow kills enemies on the battlefield, and the arrow slices or cuts the lives of the armies. In another passage, Ashurbanipal boasts that only needing 1 arrow per lion he hunted, and here we also see a connection with the hunt. Now, these are just a small selection of the notes and searches I made of the ego networks, but across the board, and even in this small selection, it's clear that there was no connection that I could see between archery equipment and fertility. However, we can see some clear hegemonic, or if we remember back to that theory slide, ideals seen by Neo-Assyrian society of what it means to be a man, aspects tied to archery equipment. The first is the obvious link with warfare and martial prowess. And the second is a little bit more specific, and that is that the arrow was the deadly part of archery equipment. And the ideal scenario was to use as few arrows as possible. So this connection to death and killing means I find it even stranger to suggest that these pieces of military equipment would have a connection to virility or fertility. If we follow Hoffner's logic, this means that a piece of equipment that was designed to end life and was seen in this way by the Neo-Assyrians had some sort of symbolic role in creating new life, which I find rather strange and would seem to be a cognitive dissonance if it was true. Not only that, but the metaphorical allusion in Psalms 127 is about the number of arrows in a quiver. In Psalms, the goal is to have as many arrows as possible, but in the Assyrian text, it seems like the opposite was the ideal. If you use as few arrows as possible, you were showing that you were such a good archer that you didn't need many. So in this regard, and when we take into account that there is also no evidence to base this connection, I think it's really clear that there is no link between archery equipment and virility during the Neo-Assyrian period. And that's my small minor rant, I apologize for that. In addition to these connotations, there is also a clear connection to divinities. Ishtar, Ninurta, Marduk, Ashur, and the Sabeti are all mentioned in connection to archery equipment. And they are mentioned either with pieces of their personal equipment, or these gods are giving items to the kings. So we can see that archery equipment can be a succinct manner of demonstrating both martial prowess as well as a connection with the divine world. What was really interesting to me and my research goals is that this method also highlighted some non-hegemonic traits of masculinities. This is largely based on the findings of kashtu, or the word for bow. The use of kashtu in curse formulae in oaths and treaties highlights vulnerability on the battlefield as well as incompetence as non-hegemonic traits. We see gods breaking bows in warfare or as a punishment, and this makes those holding the bow absolutely useless on the battlefield and are effectively waiting to be killed by the Assyrian army. Another formulation that I wasn't able to go into detail that I came across was the concept of turning the bow. This was not breaking the bow, but turning it back to front in someone's hand, with the archer, instead of holding the limb, they are now holding the bowstring. This shows incompetence at holding the bow and correlates with epithets of foreign kings not knowing how to worship the gods correctly. So we can see this overriding non-hegemonic theme of not having wisdom that is shown through this motif. So this presentation has used the methods developed by the Semantic Domains team in Helsinki to uncover aspects of masculinities in connection with archery equipment. The main strength with this method was the speed and ease of analysis in comparison to the traditional methods. So far, the analysis has disproven Hoffner's argument that the quiver and arrows were symbols of male virility, at least during the Neo-Assyrian period. We can see archery equipment used to stress hegemonic traits, which were martial prowess and a connection to the gods. And the most important finding of this research is the ability to analyze non-hegemonic masculinity. And we can see archery equipment was used to demonstrate how a man was at the mercy of the Neo-Assyrian army or the king, as well as playing into the general non-hegemonic theme of incompetence or a lack of wisdom. The next step in my research is to see if these findings correlate with texts which aren't present in Aurak, such as literary texts which may be older but were known to the authors of the royal inscriptions, and to look at the visual representations of archery equipment. My favorite one of which I want to leave you with, and if you have any questions that you don't feel like talking about in the discussion, then I'm happy to be contacted through email or Twitter, and thank you very much.